Hello, welcome to this next Flip Preaching video. My name's Andy and we're going to take a slightly different path for these next 4 videos because here on the Isle of Man in the Methodist Church we are celebrating Bible Month. Now we're a bit behind the curve on this. Most other churches who are doing this did it in June, but because we had TT over here during June it would have been really disrupted. So we've saved our Bible month for September. So throughout the month of September we're going to, in all of the churches, all of the Methodist churches, we're going to have 4 Sundays where we just look at the book of Colossians and work through it step by step. So this is the first of these and there'll be 3 more to follow. So just a little tiny bit of background about the book of Colossians. It's one of the letters, so it's not a gospel, it's one of the letters. We don't really know who wrote it. The general consensus is that although it says it's by Paul, the general consensus now is that it was written kind of by one of Paul's friends or followers. And at the very end of the letter he says, I've added this greeting in my own hand, which kind of implies that someone else wrote it. Now we don't know whether Paul dictated it. We know he was in prison at the time that it was written. We don't know if one of his followers just kind of wrote it in their style and he signed it at the end. There's some clues that might be the case because the language and the theology is slightly different to the rest of Paul's letters. But anyway, Paul had something to do with it. It's one of Paul's followers, or maybe Paul himself. It was written to the Christians in a town called Colossae. I might get all these pronunciations wrong, but the town called Colossae, which is near Ephesus, near Laodicea, in modern-day Turkey. And we don't know much about it. Paul never visited it, we know that much. There was a Christian church there, a few Christian house churches, possibly founded by a man called Epaphras, who was one of Paul's followers. We don't know very much about Colossae. We do know that it was from the archaeology of Colossae, we know that it was a place where they had a culture where they worshipped a god called Sibyl, and there were all sorts of fertility rites, all sorts of ways of worshipping which meant that you would harm your body in order to worship Sibyl. Quite sort of mystical, out there ways of worshipping. And all of those influences seemed to be creeping into the church. So Paul seemed to be writing this letter to try and get them back onto the straight and narrow. We know that Colossae was flattened by an earthquake in the year 60, and there's no mention of that in the book, in the letter. So therefore we can assume that this was probably written before the year 60, probably not much before it, so around about the year 59, so this is quite early in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so let's go. We're going to deal with it over 4 weeks, and there are 4 chapters, but we're not quite going to slice it into a chapter a week because the last chapter is a bit disappointing if you just have that on its own. So we're going to skew it a bit forward. So today we're going to look at chapter 1, verses 1 to 23. Now it begins like all letters of Paul do with the general introduction, how grateful he is for the church, how much he loves the people there. But I want to skip ahead in this video because we've not got very much time and have a look at a really interesting chunk which is between 15, this is chapter 1, verses 15 to 20. Now the language of the writing changes, becomes very different. It's as if Paul, or the author, has taken an existing piece of writing and stuck it in, cut and pasted something in. Possibly a hymn, possibly a bit of liturgy that they use in the church, but something in 15 to 20 is something which Paul has sort of inserted in, and he does that a lot in his letters. we don't really know much about it. This hymn, it's amazing, it's really, really interesting, but it's quite unique, it's quite different to anything else you find in Paul's letters. It's a bit similar to the start of John's Gospel, which talks about Jesus being there at the beginning of creation, a cosmic view of Jesus. And this bit here has the same feel. If you read it through, it has phrases like Jesus is the image of God, the icon of God, the icon of the invisible God. So God, invisible, is revealed in the person of Jesus. And that's always a good place to start. If you want to know what God's like, you look at what Jesus was like, what he said, did, his way of doing things, and that's what God is like. Jesus was the image of God. He was the firstborn in all creation. Jesus was there, Christ was there before everything else, right there at the start. In him were created all things. Christ was involved in the creation of everything in the start. All things are, he has the authority over everything. He's the head of the church. Sometimes it's easy to forget that and think that we've got our own way, we make the decisions of what the church should do. But Jesus is the head of the church. We must not forget that. And in verse 20 we get an amazing phrase that through him he reconciles all things. He reconciles all things. He puts everything right. So the work of Christ is to sort everything out, to make everything good, to put all the things that are wrong right. Such a vast view of the work of Christ, and we need reminding of that now and again. When we get bogged down in thinking that things are going bad, that we're worried about how the world is going, we've got to remember that Jesus is about reconciling all things. And God doesn't do things by half. It's not reconciling some things, it's reconciling all things, repairing it all. So what a wonderful, wonderful way to start this letter. A reminder that Jesus was there at the start, he's there till the end, and he's going to sort it all out. We have to hold on to that hope. Hold on to that hope that all things will be restored. And our response is to say yes. To say we want to be part of that, and we worship Christ who set it all in motion. Now, we don't really know, as I said, where this hymn came from, because there are a lot of bits in it which suggest it might have been an old Jewish hymn praising wisdom. Wisdom crops up again and again in the Old Testament, and wisdom was there at the start of creation. It's like the female, feminine part of God. So it seems possible that Paul has taken this old hymn to wisdom and swapped it and made it a hymn about Jesus instead. I think that's quite nice. So have a good read through this first bit in Colossians, but focus on 15 to 20, this hymn of Christ, the cosmic Christ, the one who reconciles and restores all things. It's wonderful. Okay, join me next week when we have a look at the next part. Okay, thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.